So you have that dynamic to Zelensky speaking on the floor of the House. And of course, Schumer talking about, I hope Republicans don't take a page out of President Trump's book and his friendship with Putin doesn't put them up. Like, how does this help the dialogue at all? And more importantly than that, like, what the hell's the mission in Ukraine? What's the end state? We're spending over $100 billion with probably 100 more promised in this omnibus spending bill. Like, where's the money going? What are we using it for? And then never mind the fact that the Biden family has some weird incestuous relationship with the leadership of Ukraine. Like, you know, fire the prosecutor or you don't get the $1 billion type stuff. Like, yeah. And all the while, Pete, the American people can't put gas in their car and can't afford to put food on their table. I just think the priorities are just totally jacked up.
I couldn't say it better myself. Everything you laid out is spot on. I mean, it's the opposite of America first. And that's what
absolutely
Trump threatened, the international order of Council on Foreign Relations, Washington, D.C., Brookings Institute types who just assumed that the way exactly. Things worked forever in the world will be the way they work. And they were never told their wars were stupid, or their generals were losers, or that NATO didn't step up, or that China, would unleash a virus. So let's call it the China virus and hold them to account for it. All of those things were a calling out of an international order that was failing and is continuing to fail, and now has a great advocate in the regime currently in the White House. So they go right back to business as usual. And Ukraine, you can't. That Schumer statement you mentioned about him sort of talking about Putin it's basically a fight Donald Trump by fighting Putin through Zelensky war in Ukraine. Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's like it's their ability
dude, that's so true. That is so true.
They finally found a war they just absolutely love. And it was all over the defense of Europe, as if he couldn't even take Kiev. Now he's going to take Europe. And we need to throw the kitchen sink at it, even though he's got a bunch of nukes and could light the world on fire if he wanted to. And this is the greatest threat to democracy the world has ever seen. Yet we don't know where a lot of these weapons are going. And we're not even funding our own military. We can't even recruit into our own military, let alone all the other. And we have a border that we're pumping billions to defend a border. And our border is like,
Schumer's like, Zelensky comes to the House floor as the embodiment of freedom itself. Like, freedom, we just heard for the last week is the Twitter files of the FBI paying American taxpayer dollars to Twitter to then censor Americans whose taxpayer dollars paid for the censorship. Correct. Since when do Democrats care about freedom? You remember, I'm sure, many of the fights that we had, like over the Iraq war and the war in Afghanistan. And since when are Democrats pro-war? What world do we live in? And you talk about a crazy world where guys like me and you, I'm not anti-war, not by a long shot. Like, I understand that freedom needs to be protected, and there are those of us that need to rise up to do it. And God forbid, if there's ever a war where our freedom needs to be protected, I'll be the first one in line going to protect it. But these sort of proxy wars that feed the sort of military-industrial complex, and you talk about the lack of trust in our institutions, like, I'm at a point where I don't trust anything that the government is saying. And the idea that Zelensky comes to the House floor as the embodiment of freedom is laughable to me.
Well, he's banning at the same time, he's banning certain media outlets, and he's banning, certain portions of the church. I mean, he's consolidating power in some ways.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a bit ironic. But yeah. So here we are in love with a new war that has any series of umpteen unintended consequences, fresh off of two wars that spent 20 years and unleashed massive amounts of unintended consequences that our leaders told us were either unimportant or wouldn't happen. I guess it just reminds us of the fallen nature of humans, how dumb we really will be forever, and how craven for power. To your point, that find a cause you can champion as if it is the champion of freedom, because you're not actually fighting for freedom, but you know that that's what America's supposed to be premised on. So instead, you wave the flag, you wave the blue and yellow flag as if it's the American flag, and say that you're a patriot.